Afternoon, everybody. So earlier today, I think you all know, the first shipments of humanitarian assistance arrived on the shores of Gaza through the multinational humanitarian maritime corridor that the President announced during his State of the Union address. As we speak, additional aid from the United States and other countries is arriving in Cyprus, where it will be screened by Israeli authorities and loaded onto ships for delivery via the maritime corridor, the temporary pier that we've been talking about. And here you can see trucks just today. The first truck includes pallets from the UAE, as a matter of fact, heading across that causeway, that temporary causeway, onto the beach. And once in Gaza, once on the beach, the aid will be distributed to those in need by the United Nations. So in less than 2 months, the United States was able to assemble a complex multinational logistical mechanism to facilitate the delivery of life-saving assistance in Gaza, to galvanize commitments from partners around the world, and to leverage the United Nations logistical capabilities to facilitate the distribution of this aid inside Gaza. So this is a humanitarian effort. And contrary to what we've been seeing out there in the information space, particularly in the region, it is designed solely, only, for the delivery of humanitarian assistance. There's no other purpose for this than humanitarian assistance. And we're obviously grateful for all the U.S. service members and our teams at USAID and the State Department for their tireless work over the past few weeks to get this going. Through the humanitarian maritime corridor, USAID plans to provide initial contributions of more than 170 metric tons of nutrient-rich food bars to support 11,000 of the most vulnerable children and adults, ready-to-use therapeutic foods to treat more than 7,200 cases of severe wasting in children, and nearly 90 metric tons of critical supplies such as plastic sheeting for shelter, jerry cans to hold clean water, and hygiene kits to support more than 33,000 people. And just today, as you're seeing here, we were able to get more than 300 pallets of some of that material in there. Now, today was just the start. It was the first day. There's still work that has to be done to reach what we call initial operating capability, but we hope to be able to increase the number of pallets that get in over the coming days and keep that sustainable. And we'll keep you updated, of course. All of this assistance is in addition to the thousands of tons of food and other non-food items that are being provided by a number of international partners, including, as I said, the UAE, United Kingdom, EU, to name a few, as well as resources to support the overall mission, including critical equipment to move that assistance. We anticipate an increase in the flow of assistance from additional countries and organizations, utilizing and steadily scaling up, as I said, the humanitarian maritime corridor every single day that goes by. In recent days, we've seen some progress in the number of trucks entering Gaza via the land crossings as well. Yesterday, more than 360 trucks moved into Gaza. Between April 5th and May 16th, an average of 176 trucks entered Gaza every single day. It's not enough. I recognize that. We all recognize that. But it is ongoing, and we're hoping to get it increased. Obviously, we're going to continue to work with Israel to that end. I do want to make one important point on this before I leave this topic. There is a robust security plan for this effort, and we remain vigilant to potential threats to our service members that are working on the pier and humanitarian aid organizations and workers helping with the distribution and the collection at the marshaling area on the ground. It remains a top priority. We're going to remain laser focused on ensuring the safety of everybody involved in this effort.
Thanks, Admiral. I wanted to ask you about the 3 hostages whose bodies were recovered in Gaza. Was the U.S. given any details, particularly about where they were recovered and how they were recovered?
It's just horrible news, and our hearts go out to the families who are having to deal with this terrible news. I don't have any information that we knew ahead of time or that we had any more. We have had, since the bodies have been recovered, any additional information or context from the Israelis on this.
Okay. The 5 American hostages who are still unaccounted for,
Correct.
Is there any new intelligence about their whereabouts or their potential well-being?
Sadly, no. We don't have any information that that leads us to a conclusion that they're no longer alive, but we just don't have any additional context whatsoever.
Thank you. So what is the status of the aid on that first truck that went in? Is it being distributed, or is it still waiting?
I was told right before coming out here that the UN has now taken possession of these first pallets and are getting them ready for distribution inside Gaza. So, look, I mean, hopefully by the time we're done here, I mean, some of that stuff will actually be in the mouths of some hungry people, but we'll see.
Thank you, Corinne, and thank you, Admiral. You just spoke about the importance of protecting humanitarian aid workers, and it's been a month and a half since the IDF released a report about the World Central Kitchen. Has the U.S. finished reviewing that report, and what did it conclude?
I'm not aware that we have some sort of final conclusion on that, but I'll tell you, I'll take the question, we'll go back and I'll check with my State Department colleagues, but I'm not aware that we've come to some different or final conclusion about
When
it.
we asked you several times in the past, you said we're still reviewing the report. It takes a long time to go through all the facts and figures, so.
I just don't have an update for you.
Okay, last night, Israel's defense minister said that the IDF would send more troops into Rafah. Do you have a response to that?
I think we've addressed this one already. As always, I'll let the Israelis talk about their military operations and where they put their troops. Point one. Point two, they have a right and a responsibility to go after Hamas, including in Rafah. And as I just mentioned, Jake's going to raise this issue when he goes to Israel on Sunday. They have a right and responsibility to do that. How they do that matters. And that's part of the conversations that we also want to have, and Jake will have, about going after that terrorist capability in Rafah in a way that's targeted, precise, and quite frankly effective. We don't believe, still don't believe, that the way to do it is to smash into Rafah with a large body of armed forces on the ground in an indiscriminate and reckless manner. So I'm not dodging the question. I don't know the context with which Minister Gallant said that. I can just tell you that nothing's changed about our view that we don't support a major ground operation or a large operation in Rafah. That would put now it's about 1 million people at greater risk.
You mentioned that the aid coming through the pier was going to be screened by Israeli authorities. How confident are you that that's not going to cause sort of delays in terms of the aid being held up? And also, if I may, how confident are you that there's not going to be delays at the other end, at the pier end as well?
Well, look, I mean, it's day one. And as I just said, we've got indications here just before I came on out here that some of that aid was already moving into Gaza. That's pretty impressive for day one, just day one. The inspections are actually happening in Cyprus. And that's a really important component of this modular system that we've constructed here. So the inspections are happening before the ships even leave Cyprus and move on down to the eastern coast. I'm sorry, the eastern med, off the coast of Gaza. So right now, it seems like a very good system in place. But again, it's day one, so we'll take a look and see how it goes.
Inspections being done in tandem with anyone else, such as the United States?
The IDF is responsible for the inspection regime in Cyprus. And as I said, on this first day, it worked well.
On Jake Sullivan's travel this weekend, did the U.S. government receive any assurances from Israel that it wouldn't expand its Rafah operation while he's there?
I'll just say, without getting into our diplomatic conversations, we've said this before, that we're going to continue to talk to the Israelis about alternatives to major ground operations in Rafah. That is not what they're conducting right now. And they have assured us that they are willing to continue to have those discussions with us before they make any major decisions. And I'll leave it at that.
Can you share an update on the American doctors in Gaza who are trying to get out of there, and what your understanding is, what the U.S. government assessment is of the holdup?
There's no holdup. They're out. There was 20 American doctors. 17 are out now. Came out today, and all 17 are they wanted to leave. I won't speak for the other 3, but I can assure you that any of them that wanted to leave are out now.
And then just finally, you referenced the security plan for the port and the pier. Secretary Austin, a couple of weeks ago, before it was operational, said his understanding was that if U.S. troops were fired upon, that they may fire back. Is that still your understanding of what would happen here?
100%.
Thank you, Corinne. Thank you, Admiral. When it comes to those bodies that were recovered, the 3 hostages, what impact does that have on the current ceasefire negotiations? Does it set those talks back?
I don't think we can say that right now. First of all, our focus, and I'm sure our Israeli counterparts' focus too, is on the families who are getting this horrible news. As you know, the talks didn't go anywhere last week. Unfortunately, we just didn't get to a successful conclusion. One of the things that Jake wants to cover when he goes over back to the region is to see what we can do to keep those talks going and get some kind of resolution here. But I don't think it's difficult to see how this grim news today is going to have a major effect on on the hostage deal negotiations. We really want to get this done so that we can get 6 weeks of a ceasefire that can maybe lead to something more enduring.
And part of that ceasefire deal is the release of hostages. I know you said you don't know how many Americans are still alive, but is there a broad assessment of how many hostages overall are still alive?
I would refer you to the Israelis for an exact number. I know it's north of 100. I've seen estimates of maybe 130 total. Not all of them. We don't believe all of them are alive. We don't know exactly what the breakdown is.
And of course, Rafah is going to be a big point of discussion when Sullivan is in the region. Can you just talk about the impact that the president's withholding of those 2,000-pound bombs have had on the relationship and Israeli decision-making when it comes to what we're seeing in Rafah right now?
It's not a withholding. Just there was a pause put in place on a shipment of 2,000-pound bombs, and that pause is still in place. I would remind you that other aid, other weapons and capabilities from the United States continues to flow to Israel. They are not left defenseless. And they also have, without getting into specifics, they have inventories of existing, like similar capabilities that they already had available to them. I won't speak to their operations, but I think you can just discern from news coverage alone that they continue to conduct operations in Rafah and elsewhere in Gaza.
So you're saying they already have inventories of the 2,000?
I'm just saying they have existing inventories of capabilities, and more capabilities continue to go. I won't get into the details of that for their own operational security. But I guess I didn't really answer your question, though, on decision-making. I think, well, I don't think, we know that they know what our concerns are with respect to Rafah. And how they go into Rafah and what that looks like. And again, Jake's going to go over this weekend and he'll reiterate those same points.
John, just to follow up what you told me this morning, were there any conditions that Israelis impose on certain items in this aid that will get into Gaza? Because in the past, they won't allow scissors, for example, wheelchairs, other items, or they just purely food?
This is really focused, certainly today, and I think in the coming days, it's really going to be focused on food. Nutrition. That's really the focus, and there's been no restrictions placed by the Israelis on that.
Okay,
And I want to add one more point. You reminded me that the Israelis, and the IDF in particular, have been enormously helpful and supportive of this effort, this temporary pier, and their role on the beach and on the ground in supporting it. They've been very, very helpful, extremely cooperative.
And the distribution, you just said that UN agencies going to be in charge. Does this include UNRWA? And second, will be any supervision by the IDF or in the steps of distribution, not just offloading of the pier?
I want to be careful here because I don't want to violate operational security issues. As I said in my opening statement, the food will be distributed by the UN and other aid organizations. I'll let the UN speak to that, how they're going to do that. When you get the material ashore, it goes into what we would call a marshalling area. So it's a part of the beach where it can be placed safely until it can be then head out on trucks into Gaza. I would just say that there's an adequate security apparatus in place for that purpose, and I think I need to leave it at that.
And finally, just one thing on the hostages. Any confirmation that actually reports indicating that the bodies that they recovered today, that the hostages were killed as far as December? They were not killed recently.
I don't have that level of information. I don't know.
Thank you, Greg. Hi, Admiral. Just quickly to follow up on the military pier, are U.S. troops guarding it on the ground?
There is not on the ground. So, as I said in my opening statement, there are no U.S. service members in Gaza. There is a small U.S. military component on the pier itself. And they're there really to do sort of two things. One is to provide a modicum of security for it, but also to assist with the logistics. I mean, you're going to have ships pulling up to this pier, not the big cargo ships. They'll transport it to smaller ships off the coast of Gaza. Those smaller ships will bring the goods onto the pier, and you're going to need some logistical support to get it from the ships onto the trucks. So there's a small footprint of U.S. military on the pier, but they will not go into Gaza.
How many, when you say small?
I think I'm going to let the Pentagon speak to the numbers. I don't want to violate that, but it's not it's not a huge number.
And why is the U.S. confident that Israel will not strike any of the vehicles that are taking aid? And I understand you said that they've been
They have been
hopeful,
extraordinarily
but
cooperative.
have they offered explicit assurances that they will not? I mean, because they attacked the World Food Kitchen cars that were carrying aid.
And they investigated, and they fired people that they thought were at fault, and they apologized for the mistake, and they have tried to improve their deconfliction processes. We are not worried about the Israelis striking the convoys of trucks that are coming off of that pier. They are actually participating in helping marshal that material ashore and then get it into Gaza, so that's not a concern.
Thank you, Corinne. So just to clarify, John, the Israelis and the American soldiers, the small footprint of American soldiers, will be working together to marshal these areas.
There is a small component of U.S. service members on the pier. There are no Israeli Defense Forces on the pier.
And so, is there anything more that you can preview on President Ruto's visit next week, especially in terms of shoring up partnership against China's influence on the continent?
We'll have more to say on the state visit as we get closer to it.
Okay, and then just one more, and feel free if you want to take this one, Corinne. Many of those protests on campus have linked the Palestinian cause to activism of other global injustices, including racism against African Americans. And so you both have said often that the president understands the emotions behind these protests. But I was wondering specifically, as the president is ramping up his outreach to black voters, is he aware of and sensitive towards the black community and how they might see a common parallel of injustice between themselves and Palestinians?
Let me take this. Let's let the Admiral finish what he came
That's
to
a-
do, and then I'll take some.
That's definitely not a question for me.
John, you mentioned the U.S. providing some security. I thought the IDF was going to be providing the security, but is there a small component of U.S. forces that are also there providing some security?
There's a
for the pier?
small component of U.S. service members on the pier, as I said, that will be helping with force protection, of course. I mean,
Speak to the number.
I'm not going to speak to the number. I'll let the Pentagon do that.
And then there's still U.S. forces or U.S. troops offshore in addition to those on the pier.
There's a Navy component. There's a Navy assistance in getting the material onto smaller vessels out further away from the pier, well off the coast, so that those smaller vessels then can transload the material onto the pier. I mean, you've seen the pictures of the piers. It's not practical to bring a big freighter cargo ship up against that thing. I mean, it's anchored to the seabed, but it's temporary. It's not, not concrete piles in there. So what we do is we take the stuff off the bigger ships, all well off the coast, put it on smaller U.S. Navy vessels. Those smaller U.S. Navy vessels will bring it into the pier and offload it so it can get onto trucks.
And just overall, this area has been targeted before by a mortar attack. What is the administration trying to do to prevent and deter an attack from happening again, and what efforts are being done to protect those U.S. forces there?
Part of my being up here today is a little bit of that, to make it clear what this is and what it's not. And there's been some bogus stuff out there in the information environment, particularly in the region, that this has some sort of military capacity or operational capacity for the IDF, and it just doesn't. It's nothing more than humanitarian assistance. And we've also passed that message back through the appropriate channels to Hamas so that they understand exactly what this is. And look, showing pictures, you all can get online and see what it is. I mean, we're making no secret about what this thing is and what it's not.
Thanks, Corinne. Admiral, I know this is day one, maybe closer to hour one of this pier initiative. But even at full capacity, it'll only be a fraction of the amount of aid. Is the United States working on or negotiating, figuring out other methods of getting additional aid in via other avenues?
Well, look, there's no better way to do it than the land crossings. There's just not. And before the war, there was 500 trucks going in a day over a course of different crossings, and we want to get back up to that level if we can. Now, that's a tall order, I get that, and we haven't been able to even get a sustainable 300-plus trucks in a day. But it's important that Rafah open immediately. Other crossings are open, but there's been challenges with getting some of that aid through those crossings, particularly protest activity on the Israeli side. And those delays, those problems have got to be solved. And I have no doubt that Mr. Sullivan will raise those issues as well when he's over there. But this is meant to be additive, this temporary pier. Additive, not an alternative. There's just no alternative, really, to getting trucks in on the ground.
Okay, Brian, you have the last.
Hey, Admiral. I have a question about the death toll in Gaza. Does President Biden have confidence in the casualty numbers coming out of Gaza?
The president watches this very, very closely, and you've heard him talk about the more than 30,000 people that have been killed, and he said the majority are women and children. He's also said that's unacceptable. And as we've maintained time and time again, the right number of civilian casualties ought to be 0. But in terms of, what specific number we're quoting or citing on any given day, I mean, we're doing the best we can working with the Israelis to ascertain the scope of the civilian suffering, but it's obviously immense.
Has his confidence in the numbers coming out of Gaza increased since late October when he said he had no confidence in the numbers?
You've heard the president talk about the numbers and talk about the concern. And the most important thing, aside from obviously how tragic that is what we're doing to alleviate and help improve conditions in Gaza, including through this temporary period today. Thanks, everybody.